Welcome to the We Can Do It Women movement, where women 60 and wiser step into the spotlight and make the rest of their lives the best of their lives. I'm your host, Debra Morrison, a wealth building expert and champion for extraordinary women just like you. Yes, for 47 years, I've helped women secure their financial futures, and now I'm on a mission to ignite a revolution. Yes, showing the world that at 60, 70, and beyond, some of us might be a nickel slower, yet we're all just getting started. And our esteemed guest today comes to us from Ottawa, Canada, Clare Beckton. She hails from a humble beginning, we'll deal with that later, and has developed into an award-winning advocate for women's leadership. She's a former senior executive in the Canadian government. She's a lawyer, she's an author, she's a leadership consultant, a founding executive director of the Carleton University Centre for Women in Politics and Public Leadership. Clare, welcome to the show.
Thank you. And it's Carleton University, actually, in Ottawa.
Okay. Thank you so very much. Well, for our audience, I want to give a little bit of the backstory because it's impressive indeed, Clare, and it, to your words, shapes the woman you have become. And so Clare grew up in a rural Saskatchewan family. She calls it poor family, yes, and very
Yes.
modest means. They lived in a three-room, quote unquote, shack without running water. Her father had a grade 10 education, her mother grade 10, both of them grade 10, my bad. And despite the environment, she developed an acute awareness, probably because of the environment, the acute awareness of power structures and the impact of poverty, which inspired her ambitions and the later work on equality and social justice. As a child, Clare experienced the realities of rural poverty firsthand, a background you've cited in interviews and your writing as crucial to forging the resilience and determination that has taken you thus far. And boy, have you marched through success after success, busting through challenge after challenge. Through her education and perseverance, she rose from these humble beginnings, eventually earning degrees from the University of Saskatchewan. And I'll get into a whole array of her degrees here in a moment. Her experiences in those early years influenced her later commitment to opening doors for women and marginalized groups. It's just, I just have chills. Instilled in her a lifelong passion for fairness and public service. And she says, yes, she believes everyone's origin story, and particularly hers, can be a source to propel us forward, because sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes people fold in the pressure of that, and to keep us humble and continue to inspire us to reinvent ourselves no matter our age. Wow, I'm just going to take a breath there and ask you to opine on any of that. We're going to get into the degrees and all of that here in a second, but talk to us a little bit about that upbringing and your family life and what you felt in the moment. And then, of course, as you age, you reflect back and how you evolved in that whole process, Clare.
Oh, thank you, Deborah, for that. And thank you for having me on this morning.
Uh,
Yes, I think that your background is so important. It can either hold you down or it can inspire you. And it all depends on you. I mean, yes, I grew up with three brothers. It was literally a shack. We had no running water, no electricity. And when it rained, well, the roof often leaked, but we had pots and pans to catch the water. And I would jokingly say we had the best orchestra around. But what it did is growing up on that farm and watching my father struggle and watching nature, there were two things. One, you learned about resilience because farmers can't give up. They've got to keep going. And we had lots of food, but we had nothing else. We had no money, we had no vehicles. We went to school in a sleigh in wintertime because they didn't plow our roads for some reason, even though we paid taxes in the municipality. But I grew up in nature and I know how important nature can be as a form of inspiration, but also when you have a tough time, going back there and using it as a source of reflection and strength.
oh,
And
yeah.
that, so when that forest bathing came out, I said, yes, I understand. There were no forests in Saskatchewan, but nature bathing was perfect.
Perfect. Wow. So, being raised there in Saskatchewan, you had then you began your pursuit of all of your professional degrees, which are numerous. You hold degrees, two degrees from University of Saskatchewan, the BA and an LLB. Then you went to
Mhm.
Illinois with the teaching fellowship for a year. Uh,
Yes.
Taught law as a professor at Dalhousie University, and in 2004 went to Harvard University and got your degree in and your master's in public administration, MPA. You're a Fulbright scholar,
Mhm.
Littauer Fellow, and you served as the Assistant Deputy Attorney General for Aboriginal Affairs at Justice Canada. I want to dig into that because it really speaks to me in terms of this cross-cultural involvement that you immersed yourself in. Obviously, you had an extensive legal background, or you have legal training, clearly. Talk to us about your role in the Aboriginal movement, because boy, I applaud you there.
Well, there was a lot of things. I could go back a little bit to when I was teaching law at Dalhousie, because at that time we have a constitution like the United States does. We did not have a charter of rights. We did not have things like equality and freedom of expression. But in 1982, we got a new charter of rights and freedoms. And in 1985, the equality guarantees were going to come into force. And I was invited by the government to come up because I had developed an expertise in this new charter to come to the government and do the review of all the legislation, so make it in line with the charter. So that was how I really got involved. And then through my work with the Justice Department, both at Fisheries and others, I encountered Indigenous Aboriginal people and some of the challenges that they were facing. So in the role of Assistant Deputy Attorney General in Aboriginal, now it would be Indigenous, as we say in Canada, I loved the challenge. I competed for it, won it, and said, I think I can make a difference here in how we do things. We had a program for Aboriginal justice, and we were trying to use different means for justice. We dealt with residential schools, which I don't know if you're familiar with, but how many children were sent, they were taken away from their parents, sent to these residential schools, and a number of them were abused. So we had all of those cases. And I tried to work with our lawyers to do it in a humane way. I mean, it was very difficult, very emotional. There was what we called survivor circles. And this was when we would get together with the Indigenous people who had been abused, and they would tell their stories. And I can't tell you how many tears I shed
Oh,
during that process. But, it was a really deeply felt process. I went to reserves, I went to meet with many Indigenous people and I would never say I'm an expert, but I learned a lot about Indigenous culture, the amazing people. And therefore, you combine that when you bring that into the work that you do, your work is much better because you have a deeper understanding of what you're doing and the impact of what you're doing in people, which I think often is a challenge around legislation. And I see it in all countries. The challenges of you put out things, but you really don't think about what's the impact on real people in their daily lives.
yeah. Yeah, because so often the people making the rules have the gold, and those aren't the people that have suffered, right? As much as the people
Yeah.
on the other side of that equation. No, I didn't know about the taking the children away. Talk to us about that. That's just that's frightening. I mean, we have
Well,
ice.
it was a policy evolved in the 1800s when, people, and I know that the United States has a similar history in different ways around Indigenous or Native Americans, as they're called in the US, because I have visited some of the northern eight pueblos and shared our stories. But the residential schools were set up with the idea that these were savages and you had to give them an education, but they were taken away from their families. They weren't allowed to speak their indigenous language. So many of them couldn't communicate with their communities when and if they came back. A number of them died in the residential schools. And at that time, of course, there was a lot of diseases. And when you have people together like that, and then there were priests and leaders in the schools who abused a number of the children, and we've been dealing with that. That was one of the files that I had, is how to get a settlement for dealing with all of this abuse that had happened. And you'd see, I mean, for example, some priests would be moved from a white community into an indigenous community where they were free to prey upon these young savages. And so it was a really sad part of our history. And, it still continues, that legacy still continues in Canada because it's intergenerational,
Yes, it is. Yes, it
the
is.
impacts. Yeah.
And so from I mean, that breaks my heart, and yet, it's not unique to Canada. I mean, we certainly have
Yeah.
non less than respective and abusive towards Native American people here in the United States. And so this, I'm so impressed that your law focus then was really civil rights, trying to not trying, you did it, busting through systemic injustice. If I can do an overlay, is that representative?
Yes, I mean, because you really have to make systemic change. And that's why I wanted to do some of the things in government when we were doing charter reviews, when we were looking at Indigenous, and later when I became the head of Status of Women, we were looking at how do you change the system? What are the things you need to do? And it's never a simple one answer, as we know. I mean, these require interventions at different points. And so you start along that road, and of course, the government changes or something happens, and you get a whole different perspective or different points of view. And so you can go backwards. Sometimes I say it's 4 steps back, 3 forward, maybe 4 forward and 2 back, but it's never a linear straight path.
Right. Yeah. Sisyphus. You probably felt like Sisyphus. Um,
Some days, yes.
So so talk to us about well, first of all, I just applaud that work. Amazing. And you, along the way, I don't remember the exact year that your book, Own It, came out, but I own the book, Own It, and I everybody own the book, own it. It is a powerful, powerful book in which Claire addresses challenge and so forth that people face in balancing careers, professional ambitions, and societal expectations around the caregiving and home responsibilities. I love how you start out by saying, it's okay to lean in so long as you continue to do the housework and provide the meals. Talk to us about what spawned this book, of obviously your life work, but talk to us about how you got into writing the book and how long it took you to absolutely finish this, because I love this book, so I'm highly recommending it.
Thank you so much for that. Yes, I mean, I faced, as you might guess, a lot of challenges in the Justice Department and in academia as well. When I first started teaching, I was 24 years old. I was almost as young as most of my students because I had sort of done my law in less time
I'm
and
thinking,
by taking more courses. Anyway, I didn't have any money, so I had to do this quick. And so, so
Claire
when
just
I
jumps over this, but she kind of probably did her law in half the time, law degree. Go ahead.
anyway, anyway, that was great. So I faced a lot of challenges when I was an academic, young, you know, only woman on a faculty of 33, and they didn't know how to take me. And some of the students, I had one student come up to me and say, I've never had a woman professor and I don't like it. And I said, well, I'm here. That's kind of too bad. But then when I went to the Justice Department, I mean, the women were all facing similar challenges. And so I encountered setbacks. No, they weren't all the fault. They were, I mean, as much my not having the knowledge about how to be a leader. You're not born necessarily a leader. And when you don't have managers or people who try to help you, but in fact try to hinder you, it can be very challenging. So I had a number of challenges where I would run into roadblocks and I'd go home and have a good cry. And over time, I learned, you know what? I allow myself a short period of time for that little cry. Then it's okay, what am I going to do about it? Get back on my feet. I'm not giving up. They're not going to win. And so I kept that up. I helped learn working with the other women in the department and a really good coach. We were in victim mode, and that's not a good place to be, right? It's not a good place. When you're a victim, you give away your power to everybody else. So I said, okay, it's time to get out of that and begin to work on these challenges. And then I became passionate about leadership. When I was Assistant Deputy Attorney General, I looked around and I said, I don't see a heck of a lot of leadership here. I see people talking about management, but I don't see a lot of leadership. So I really started doing programs, taking courses, deeper understanding of what being a leader meant, and pushing it in my department about let's talk about leadership and what that matters. So when I left the government, I mean, and this was kind of a sad story. I was the head of Status of Women, and I ran into a minister that I simply could not work with. And so I decided at that point, I hadn't planned anything, but I said, you know what? Life's too short for this. So I left the government with no plans, but decided I know how I can do this. I've coached other women on how to make life transitions, so I can do this. So I took time. And during that time, as I was reflecting and I was thinking about what the next step was before I founded the center, it was, I've learned a lot through this process, so maybe I should share this a bit. So that's how the book started. It was off the corner of my desk, meaning I was building this center, I was doing all this other stuff. So you take a period of time, you write, you come back, and you think about it, and you write some more. And of course, then you have to get it published. So I worked with an actual publisher. I mean, I self-published, but I worked with a professional publisher to do it properly. So we got that image of, I think the image of the fields of wheat was reflective
Oh,
of my origins.
I mean, I was raised on a farm and I looked at that and I said, oh my heart, that is just so rich, so absolutely rich. Well, this is a very, very fine distinction, and I'm really proud of you for recognizing it so early on to distinguish leadership from management. So you obviously came in many times, probably the only woman in the courtroom or only woman in the government, only woman in certain committee meetings and so forth. And that in and of itself, just holds a terrific amount of pressure. Being a young girl, 21 years old in the old white man's field of finance, you can imagine I was in a
Yes.
and so this distinction, and I love how you tease out some of the differences, and I'd love for you to expand on that a bit about the differences between management and leadership, because especially as women coming into roles of leadership and management, I think it behooves us to know these distinctions. So opine a little bit more on that, Claire. Thank you.
Well, for me, management is about managing things. You can't manage people. It's like trying to herd cats. And I don't know if you've ever seen that video about herding cats, the cowboys out there with their lassos trying to herd the cats, saying, oh, I just love herding cats.
Yeah.
But leadership is about how you work with people to inspire them, to encourage them, to bring them along. Because, and I say to my people, I did an advancing women leadership program for 10 years. We developed and did it for 10 years. And it was saying leadership is about the people that you're working with and leading. It is not you. It is about them. It is about how you inspire them. Is how do you encourage them? How do you engage so that every person feels they're a valuable part of that team and they can put their best foot forward? And when you do that, this whole thing about diversity, equity, it becomes inclusion. And that's really what it's about. A really good leader is inclusive. They're curious. They care about the people they're working with. And
Yes.
so you're not assuming, telling people the old command and control model, that's great on a battlefield. Yes, you need that. In certain places, you need that. But in order to get to that place on the battlefield, my oldest son was an infantry officer at one point in his life. You have to have built the trust with your team first. And good leaders build trust. And so if you have the trust of your team, then when the time's there and there's an emergency, they're going to follow through with it because they trust you. And a good leader creates trust. A manager, not so much. I mean, it's about, people thinking, well, I just tell people what to do and they'll do it. But really, what you want to inspire people. And I think so often what fails in companies is they don't inspire people. They don't let people do what they hire them to do their very best. And I use the example, my youngest son is an entrepreneur. Well, both sons are now entrepreneurs, but my youngest son is an entrepreneur. And I give you an example of a recent hire he did. He hired a young man of 19, robotics. And the
Yes.
guy said, can I get this camera thing? I want to do this. And he said, just, yeah, go do it. I trust you. You do it. And so he hires him and says, do your job, which is what they do. And then you can do so much when you create an environment of trust. And I know I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek's too, and that trust
Oh,
factor.
oh, yes. Yes. Well, that is profound. And I appreciate your spending some time teasing that out because, management comes and goes, and yet leaders continue to mature and they see
Yes.
and it gets richer and richer, which is exactly why we are on a mission to bring women out of the sidelines because we've been pushed from our societal in this, south of your border and Canada. I was suspect when you get to a certain age, okay, you had the kids, maybe I never did, but you did whatever you did, and now it's kind of it's a okay, we're kind of done with you, and like, how about and so we are bringing women with so much leadership and so much verve, right? Once we give them the green light, because sometimes they haven't seen the green light in a long time, and we say, no,
Yeah.
it's not red anymore, and then goes to yellow, and get your feet wet, and then jump in because it is go time for us women because the wisdom, Claire, that we have, the wisdom that you have is it comes out of your pores, right? And it's contagious. And I think if women gather together and lead, that is going to be the army, if you will, of a societal change and the breakup of unjust systems. I mean, I was raised Christian fundamentalist. We didn't even talk about systems. It was like I put my
No.
Nigerian, a black Nigerian missionary kid at camp, and I said, "I'm not racist. Here's my black friend," right? So I mean, I was
Yeah,
before I realized about systems, and so
yeah.
I think it's important for women. Like I've encountered some women that say, "I'm kind of not inclined to be political." Well, let's say political is personal. And those who make the rules decide where our dollars are being spent as a society. And if they're not being spent on women and children and the care of our society, of our bodies, which often falls to women, then we're going to erode and splinter and die, early deaths as a society. And so I couldn't applaud your work on busting through those barriers more highly. Congratulations.
Can I also add something here? What you've spoken about is so important because you don't have to have a position to be a leader. You can lead from anywhere. And that's why I think it's so important that we understand true leadership. In your community, you can be a leader by speaking out about issues. You can be a leader by helping where others need help, by rallying people together. Leadership can be quiet. It doesn't have to be out there yelling. It can be very quiet and very effective. And so I see women all over. And when you look in communities and you say, who holds the fabric of those communities together? It's usually the women. And I think it's important for women to recognize you are being a leader when you're doing that. No matter what you're doing in that community, you are being a leader. It's not about standing up there on the stage at the UN and pronouncing I'm a leader. No, it's about what we do every day. And I used to say to my team, listen, you don't have to wait to do something huge to make a difference. Make a difference every day. And that could be as simple as a smile at the driver you see across from you who's sitting there. I have seen people's faces light up when I look over and smile at them. So you can be a leader in so many different ways, and so many of you out there are. You just haven't given yourself the credit for it.
This so ties in with the victim victor, right?
Yeah,
We're either a victim or we're a victor, and we're a creator or a reactor, right? And
yeah.
so you're calling us into um, really the spirit of feminism, as I understand it, which is, the belief that everybody, and you take the name of the underdog. We always take the name, anybody with social justice, take the name of the underdog. You don't say, okay, we'll just be humanist. Like that was the beginning of, we're trying to fight sex.
Yeah.
Oh, why don't we just be humanist? No, no. Why don't we be feminist? Because until you say that word, you have not elevated women to the same vernacular, and it doesn't hit the ear with as much power as what we've all been raised with for a million years. So enough about me. So here you are doing your law professor at Dalhousie, assistant deputy general, attorney general, Aboriginal Affairs, Justice Canada, head of status of women in Canada. That is amazing. And you founded the Carleton University Centre for Women in Politics and Public Leadership. How did that happen? And how old were you when you founded that? Because that sounds like it was pretty early on in your career.
No, actually, that was after career. That's what I called the Carleton Center was after career. That's what I call after I left the government in 2009. Everything I've done since is my passion project. I mean, I was always passionate about my work, but this is really all about passion. When people say about career, I said, no, no, I left that long ago. This is about passion. I'm passionate about advancing women's leadership. And when I was at Status of Women, we realized there was three pillars of that of advancing women. One of them was economic security. You need to have economic security, ending violence against women, and getting women into positions of leadership and helping women engage around leadership. So I decided to make my focus the latter, which was the leadership part. And so the center I was able to get started with a small grant from Chubb Insurance, which was wonderful. The woman who was leading it at the time in Canada was a very strong supporter. We got the website up, and then we started engaging around doing some research. And one of the research pieces I did was on women in mining. And as a result of that women in mining study, another woman later on, some years after, read the study, said, we need to do something about this. So I connected her to some key people, and she started a thing called the Artemis Project. And it has been amazing. She has done amazing things now with getting more women in the supply chains of that. And so we did research around how women were doing in Canada, and and met a lot of women, developed a lot of contacts. And I also said, you know what, at the time, there's no leadership programs that are effective for women. So I got a grant from, yeah, and again, a mining company, if you can believe.
Interesting.
And they gave us a grant to fund, because the woman who was leading it at the time in the mining company was a real passionate advocate for women's equality in the mining industry. So we got the funding, we developed this 5-day program, we piloted in her home community. Learned one big thing I learned from that one was leave the titles at the door. So every other program we ran after that, we told the women, everybody in this room is equal. I don't want to know your titles. It doesn't matter. Everybody has a contribution. And what a difference that made.
Oh, a
Because,
massive difference.
oh, yes, because, you know, the young women who didn't have the same experience had as much to give as the women who had more experience. And it turned out, I mean, a lot of them ended up mentoring each other and coaching each other. We had some wonderful, wonderful programs and amazing women who came through that program. Ran that for 10 years until my last, well, this year, my partner, I had decided she needed to move on with other things. So now I'm moving on as well and doing other things.
Well, that is so profound that to leave your titles at the door because I've been just acknowledging noticing intergenerational kinds of women organizations in the United States here. Probably, I guess maybe it feels like about 3 or 4 years, and they are so rich. I mean, I was just a member of a group out a couple weekends ago, and there were women of all ages. I mean, there were 85-year-olds and 18-year-olds and everything in between, and it was so rich. And I think this whole notion, we are finally putting to bed this whole notion that women climb the ladder and cut the rungs behind them. That yesteryear, shed
Yes,
that. Here we are
yes.
in authentic and creative leadership practices that do not exclude. There we are. Do not exclude, and the exclusion could be the title and the degree and where you came from and all that. So yes, you have created these leadership practices, and there are a whole bunch of bullet points underneath each of them. Talk to us just about some of the highlights that you go through in the various leadership programs that you've developed.
Well, one of the things that we found was really important is to spend the first couple of days on who are you as a leader? Like, why do you want to be a leader? What are the values? And I'm a real believer that in values-driven leadership, you need to understand what your top values are because you will be challenged and you need to have that North Star which holds you steady. And I remember when one of my bosses wanted me to do something which I did not think was appropriate or basically legal. And so I refused. It cost me, but I held on to my principles and I realized you need to have those principles. So that's one of the first things we do. And we do talk about courage. We talk about fear because people will often hold themselves back or fear, or they'll say, some people say, I'm fearless. I don't think any of us are fearless. However, we can have fear and act anyway.
There
And
you go.
that's what is so important. If you let fear hold you back, you will not make progress. But if you say, well, fear is there, but you know what? I can look at it. What are the assumptions underlying that fear? I can analyze it. And then I can say, what will happen if I don't do this? There is a risk in not doing it. And how will I feel 10 years down the line if I don't do this? Or
Absolutely.
will I make the progress that I want? So we have to confront and just move forward with that fear. And I'll tell you, one of the ways I did when I was younger, well, I still do in a way. I was terrified of flying. So you know what I did? I learned to fly. I took flying lessons. I took glider lessons. And so I learned to fly. And then once I figured out how the plane flew, I figured, well, it's not going to crash every time I get on it. I haven't crashed the plane yet.
Oh,
So,
good. That's just the action step, Claire. That is so profound, and congratulations. That's crazy. I was dear friends with Dr. Susan Jeffers, who's unfortunately died, but she had written "Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway,"
yes.
and
Yeah, exactly.
Mark book, and she is saying, when so many people are out there doing things they're not proficient, they don't know how to do, and yet they're out there doing it. We must conclude that fear is not the problem, rather how we hold the fear. And so gave us the pain power continuum. I don't know if you read it that carefully, but oh
Yeah.
my, this has been the one of the goalposts of my life. We all can be in the emotions of pain, helplessness, despair, and yet we know there's a corresponding and another side, another goalpost to which we can aspire, which is the power, and we move across there, and it gives us the latitude to not just castigate ourselves for being over here. We might be over here for a little while. I say don't buy a house there. You can stay a night or two, but don't buy it.
Yeah.
So I am so with you on the fear thing. And what I think was a cynic that said 85% of our fears don't come to fruition. So
Well, that actually Mark Twain was the one that made a joke about fear, and that's it's quite marvelous. I don't remember the exact quote, but it's like that. Most of it doesn't come, so it's a lot of worrying for nothing. But one of the expressions that I found helpful when I was debating, like when I was going to start this center, and I don't know if I can do this. I remembered the expression, "If not me, then who? And if not now, then when?" And that's when I said, okay. It's going to be me because nobody else is doing it and the time is now. And so that helps you define that path. It's like when you have setbacks, okay, you do as you said, you live in that house for a short while and it gets shorter and shorter as you practice. But then you say, what can I control? What can I do to change this? I mean, we can't control what's happening externally in many cases. We might be able to influence in some circumstances, but in some we can't. So, what do I have control over? Can control how I feel about it, can control what I do in my daily lives. So, it's maintaining that degree of control. If I get a cancer diagnosis, I can't control the fact I have it, but I can then start moving forward as what are the strategies? How am I going to deal with this? What's the path forward? And that's always been one of my mottos is, all right, what can I do in this situation?
I couldn't agree more. And the aspect of control. I mean, I might be sitting on a plane and somebody asks me what I do, right? And then they're kind of like, well, where are interest rates going? Hey, wait, time out, time out. How about you figure out what your budget is? Yeah, where your assets are. How about you control what you can control? But so often we shirk what's in our own backyard, what's right here in our own sphere, based upon some kind of, I don't know, need to converse and ask some stupid question that has nothing to do, like what about the beige book and how did your portfolio do against the Standard & Poor? If that made a nickel's worth of sense, I would answer, but it doesn't, right? So I think that the emphasis on the right syllable, I couldn't agree more with your aspect of it doesn't matter where you are in life, you can lead.
Yeah, and I think that's so important because you talked about politics and getting involved in politics. Well, a lot of people may not and will not run for office, but there's so many other ways that you can get involved in influencing and expressing your views, helping others when you see that need for help. And so it's not necessarily big P politics. There's a lot of small p politics around too. And what I learned over the years, that people always said in my Justice Department, don't get involved in the politics. But after I did a lot of analysis of it, I realized what was going on. This was men networking. That's what
Right.
politics was. And until you learned, hey, you got to network too, or you're not going to be successful because this is how these guys get ahead. They build relationships with other people, they're known, they go out for coffee while we sit there with our head down working. No, get up, look out the window, meet other people, build those relationships. And it's through those relationships. So in a community or anywhere else, you can build those relationships and be able to influence through that. And that's what we have is influence.
And we have a powerful influence and we have powerful voices once we find them. I think the biggest search is for us to find our voices, finding, okay, oh, yeah, I have values, I have wisdom, and I'm going to speak it because it's in the speaking that other people can glean. Oh my gosh, connect with that person. Okay, hey, you should know that person. And if I want us to be, a tenth of good as good in connecting each of us to each other as appropriate as the guys are, because it has gotten them to positions of management, and then they put the management thumb on our necks, and that doesn't feel so good. And sometimes we don't survive that. So it's so powerful, your work and the being completely grounded, Claire, in our values, so that to your point and your exact vernacular, we have the North Star. Because
Hmm.
I kind of say everybody needs a financial plan. I don't care. It might be skeletal. And yet what I learned in 42 years of practice is you could plan for all the ages, and I got that down. I could do that in my sleep, but it's that comeuppance.
Yes.
It's that premature death. It's that, early onset dementia. It's the loss of a child. It's the loss of a career. It's a car wreck. It's whatever it is that wasn't in the plan.
Right.
We have a plan, we have a value map, if you will, then we can see, hey, that fits with my values, it doesn't fit with my values. And that gives us the backbone, if you will, the foundation from which to pivot. Because absent that, we're like, and I say in my book, I wrote a book, My Husband Died Now, What a Widow's Guide to Grief Recovery and Smart Financial Decisions. And I say, I want to move widows from what's next to, or what next to what's next. Let's parse it down
Yeah.
because they're
Right.
next, and I want to help us formulate our nexts. So talk to us about how you were able to, through the Carleton University Center for Women, bring women who had no experience and didn't voice their leadership prowess earlier, and how you brought them through that confidence building stage to get to be leaders themselves.
Well, this is what we did through the program, is having this 5-day program that women would come on, and their organizations would send them, and we had so many that came in, and at the end of it, they said, "I feel more confident." I'll just give you a simple example. One woman said, "I was always afraid to ask if I could come in a little bit later so I could drop my son off at daycare." She said, "After the program, I went and asked," because we would say, "What happens if you don't ask?" No, you're in a situation where, and I remember advising a young woman, I said, "You want to do this, but you say, well, I don't know if they'll let me do it." I said, "Well, what'll happen if you don't ask?" "Definitely you're not going to do it. So what happens if you ask?" "Maybe they will, maybe they won't. And if they say no, well, you at least know and you can work with that." So she went and asked, and they not only said yes, they said, "Oh, we have great plans for you," and everything else. So that was a great lesson around being able to ask, to do, and in terms of leadership, it's getting over that, taking those risks to be able to move forward. And the risk may be as simply as speaking in a meeting. But as we get older, I think one of the things that, I don't know about you, but I don't care what other people think
I know,
about me.
I'm
I,
past.
I I'm long past that. I care about what I can do and what I can move forward. And I think if so many of us can accept, it doesn't matter what other people say. We can listen, we can say, yeah, okay, you got a point. I want to listen to that, move it forward. But if they're going to put you down, I mean, I used to write a blog for the Huffington Post in Canada, and I mean, there would be some comments that would be pretty nasty, but you know what? I don't care. And one person said to me, and I think it was the Edmonton Journal, gave them some commentary, and this guy wrote, "She should never be in public life." And I laughed and said, "And what have you done with your life?
Absolutely.
Tell me that after you show me what you've done with your life." But
Absolutely.
so I think we have to be prepared to say, it doesn't matter what other people, there's always going to be the naysayers, and you look out there and see that it's, what do I want to do? What do I want to accomplish? And I have the wisdom. I have the years of experience. I can do this, so let's do it.
Oh, definitely. This brings back, like, I think it's Brene Brown that says, I'll look at the comments from people that are in the arena, not the
Yeah,
outside hot shotters, right? We're
yeah,
in the arena, and we both are have our boots on. All right, now we talk. And it just occurred to me, how many times, Claire, have we been in meetings where mostly men, maybe all men beside ourselves, and we make a comment, and there's this maybe there's a slight pause, but sometimes not. And then
yeah,
a guy will state the same thing and everybody say, "Oh, Bill, great job." And so I implore us as women, when you're in a meeting and another woman makes a comment, do not leave her hanging out there. Make a
yes.
right after that, so that she doesn't feel completely alone and isn't perceived as completely alone, because absent that, it's like one little voice in the forest. I don't know.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, so true. And if it gets to Bill before you get a chance to speak, when Bill says this, he says, "Oh, Bill, I'm really glad that you appreciate Deborah's comment here. It was really smart of Deborah to put that forward." So you can bring it back to, and I don't think men do it intentionally. I just think they
Oh, I
weren't
agree.
really listening to the women. I mean, another habit they had often in meetings was interrupting. And I learned to say, "Excuse me, I'm not finished yet." And so that worked very effectively, because I worked a lot when I was the head of the head council for our Royal Canadian Mounted Police. I'd go into a room with 60 men, and I'd have the head of the meeting call, "Oh, gentlemen," and I'd look around and say, I guess I've changed in appearance in the last hour. It was,
You do
I
work
mean,
with all genders. Okay.
yeah, yeah. So, you had to be able to say, okay, they're still in the dark ages, but they're coming slowly out of it. And now, of course, we have lots of women in the senior ranks of the RCMP, but
Yeah, well, thanks be to God. You have served and you now serve on a number of nonprofit boards, and that takes a massive amount of time and energy. The chair of the Queensway Carleton Hospital Board, the Harvard Women's Leadership Board, chair of the Beechwood National Cemetery Board, visionary for the Prosperity Project, founding member of Women in Philanthropy at the Queensway Carleton Hospital, member of the owners and female founders of the subcommittee of Invest Ottawa, and the co-chair of the Program Advisory Committee of the International Business University in Toronto. Other than that, Claire, how do you feel your days?
well, I have two granddaughters who are, my son is a single dad, so I spend a lot of time with my granddaughters. And, and that's a challenge because I'm more like a mother than a grandmother when I was only prepared. So I'm trying to encourage my granddaughters to teach them about strong women and how we can move forward. So I think it's so important to be that role, and it keeps you very young because you're running all the time. you know. And so I do that as well as all the other things. And I foolishly, I'm no longer the chair of Beechwood, but I am the chair of the fundraising committee because we're going into expansion. I said to myself the other day, how did I do that? I'm not a fundraiser, but anyway, what the heck? When you talked earlier about people who are doing things, if you wait till you know how to do something, you'll never do it. So you just get started and you'll figure it out as you go. And if you make a mistake, well, correct it and move on. After all, that's how we learn, isn't it? If we don't make mistakes, who is it said if you're not making mistakes? I think it was Einstein, you're not doing anything.
It's not moving, right? Right. Yeah.
Yeah, you're not doing anything because we all make mistakes. And of course, that's part of the learning process.
Yeah, I am so I kind of recognize disparity when people are talking. I think there's something like in my little crap dictator goes off and says something's incongruent. It's not like I think they're crap or their ideas crap. It's just that there's something dissonant. There's a dissonance. And so when people, particularly around their money or any aspect of life, they want to know step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. They want to know the first 40 steps in succession. Well, that's not life. That's not even death. That's not how
No,
people grieve. I can tell you that right now. Uh,
no,
so and you don't know the first 3 steps of raising a kid or being in a long-term relationship. It changes. And so the
yeah,
fluid with which we want to hone our skills. It can't be understated. And to get women out of this notion that they have to know exactly how it's going to unfold is really, I think, a lifelong mission. And I applaud you for being on it because you've done magnificent work in getting women involved without them knowing all of the steps.
yeah. Well, I mean, we can't know all the steps. If we think about our own lives, did it turn out the way we imagined when we were a kid? And I can tell you, mine sure didn't. I expected I was going to be a criminal defense lawyer. Well, I never was. And I think it's about through life looking when one door closes. I'm a great believer. When one door closes, another one opens. And as long as you're looking, you'll see that door opening and you'll walk through it. Maybe you don't know where that door is going to take you, but it can take you magnificent places. And if that doesn't work out, there's something else. So I really believe that we have to understand that life doesn't unfold in a linear process. Accomplishing things doesn't happen in a linear process. There are many twists and turns in those roads. I mean, when you're walking through the woods, many paths are twisty and turns, and I equate that with life. We don't, things happen to us. And sometimes we joke and say, life is what happens when you're busy planning other things. So what you're saying is that planning process is great, and it's good to have that outline and to kind of know where you want to go and those general parameters and the values but you don't know the exact path. None of us do.
Exactly. Exactly. I just want to highlight some of the chapters in Claire's book called Own It. You can get it on Amazon or anywhere. Starting at the beginning, the values that drive us, reflection, a key to success, passions, talents, and strengths, assumptions, attitude, victimization, responsibility, and accountability, risk and fear. Love that. 2 4-letter words that are very misunderstood.
Yeah.
Listening, framing and asking, self-acceptance and owning our own power, taming the inner critic, the bridges that we build. Oh my gosh, work life integration and then own it. And this is a powerful book. And as I say, I have read through a number of the chapters, skimming them at the beginning and digging deeper. This whole passion, talents, and strengths, I think a lot of women don't even understand how strong they are, how resourceful they are. And it's incumbent upon the rest of us around them to say, hey, wait a minute, Jane, hey, Mary Jo, you can do this. You can do
Yes. Yeah, and you know, it really makes a difference when there's someone in there cheerleading. I do a lot of mentoring, and when you're cheerleading people, it can really help. But I think it's important. A lot of times we focus on our weaknesses, what we don't have, instead of focusing on what we do have. And if we focus on our strengths and build on them, then we're going to move ahead. Sorry, I've got
Yeah.
a little tickle here. I'm just getting over this thing. So it is building on your strengths, finding out what they are and building on those. And a lot of times what we're not good at doesn't matter. When I surround myself, I'm not so great on details. I can do it. I can do it. I don't like to do it. So if I surround myself with people who like to do that, who have strengths I don't have, then that's great. We can work together as a team and I focus on what I'm good at. And I think that's so important. We use one of the things we did in our leadership program was do things like the Strength Finder test, which is simple. You can get it online and it'll tell you in a way and that helps you guide you. And you can ask other people, what do you think my strengths are? What am I good at? And once you figure that out, then you can keep building on that. Now, I didn't know that I was good at a lot of things until I left the government and started exploring and said, oh yeah, I can build on that skill and I can move that one forward. I didn't consciously think about it. I just did it, right? And then you think about it later, say, yeah, I did that. I did it.
That's so key. The this whole aspect of, find out what you're weak at and try to improve that. Nonsense. Find, hone those strengths because there's someone else, right? So many of us women say, I can do that, I can do that, I can do that. Yeah, but how effective are we? And what is that doing to our, in my training from Dan Sullivan, unique ability, right? There are, yeah,
Yeah,
I clean my own house, but there are people for whom that is their passion, and I ought to allow them to swim in their lane. And so, as leaders and as managers and as owners of companies, we hire into our deficiencies. I do not need to hire another quick start. No, I do not. I need
no,
to hire
no,
someone who finishes what I start. And so, the sooner we get into that mindset of the complementarity aspect and women trusting each other, wow, what a powerhouse we are. And we've already proven it for decades. And I hope it carries into perpetuity, despite the systems that are basically, coming in very, very strong headwinds in the United States of America. War,
yeah.
but it's egregious, and I want us to be completely attentive to it, conscious of it, and not fall prey to it. So your work, Claire, has been a beacon, and it continues to be a beacon. How old are your grandkids?
My my grandkids are 9 and almost 10 and 6. And then we have like grandchildren who are 14 and 17. There's a young woman we brought into our life when she was 7, and she's like a daughter to us, and her wonderful daughters as well. So we've been very lucky. We've expanded our family by love, not by biology. And that has been, and that's what another thing I learned from my youth. My father was a very kind man, and he would welcome people into our humble abode. And my mother could, I don't know how she did it, but she could produce a meal for 22 people who landed on her on a Sunday in that little shack, but she could
Ah,
do it. And so I learned, there's always room at the table and there's always love for more. So we do that. And I think that extends to how we look at each other and at other women to say, encourage us, go ahead, do it. And I can't tell you how many times I've said to someone, just do it. You can do this. And I always remember this was a guy, not a woman, but I hired a paralegal one time. And he said to me, I'm not sure I can do this job. And I just looked at him and said, hey, I hired you because I know you can do this job. And a couple of years later, he said to me, you have no, he said, that meant so much to me that you said those words. And I just said the truth. I just said, I wouldn't have hired you if I didn't believe you could do the job. But it meant so much to him. And that was really a lesson for me about how powerful those words can be when we encourage other people.
oh, that confirmation, the confidence, and I want us to speak our confidences in other people and ourselves, certainly own that, and then spread that wealth. Because to your point, people carry around those notes that you write about each other in the second grade. Like
Mm-hmm.
a guy was killed in a motorcycle accident at age 25 or something, and in his wallet they found the note from the second grade that said, "Bill, we think you're funny," or whatever, or, "We think you're smart." I mean, we kind of disregard, that's nothing. Time out.
No,
In
no.
in a world where the activity and the hubbub and the noise is so deafening, that looking in an eye and two eyes and saying, "I believe in you,"
Yes.
is to your point, it's life changing. Talk to us about one of the biggest hurdles in your whole life, and it doesn't have to be professional, where you just thought, "Oh my heart," and somehow you busted through.
Well, I think it was the idea of going to law school because I didn't have any money. My father didn't have money. My parents had no money. I had an entrance scholarship to university that I won, but I was thinking it's so long. I don't know if I can do this. And interestingly enough, I went to see the associate dean, who was a man, and he said, "I really think you should come to law school. I really do. And you'll find a way." And he died at Christmas in my first year, but that was enough to really help me. I mean, I worked in summers, I worked in order to get the money, and I won scholarships in law school to make it through. But it was to your point about how important those words can be, because I was really doubting it. I mean, I didn't have the same level of education in the broadest sense that many of the others that came from more privileged backgrounds did. I didn't know anything about China on a table. I mean, I didn't know any of those things. I didn't know anything about art. I didn't know anything about a lot about music or any of these things, which I have self-taught myself over the years because I knew that was important. And that was one of the reasons I didn't go to Harvard initially, because I didn't feel I was ready for that. And that was a smart decision. I was
Yeah,
ready when I went later.
absolutely. No, I think it's wise to be judicious about these steps. It certainly increases the success rate and the rapidity of the success of the expediency of it. Um, I am absolutely in awe of you, Claire. I was in awe of you as I was researching you, and this conversation has been rich beyond words. I hope everybody has taken the gems that Claire has dropped. Like she just says, "Yeah, I didn't have any money for law school. I won a scholarship. I won a scholarship. She won a scholarship, right? Remind yourself where she came from, right? There weren't real role models there, particularly of women in
No,
law. So the
no.
fact that she goes out and wins the scholarship, she puts her nose to the grindstone, she puts that effort in, she wins, and the wins beget the wins beget the wins. Did she have struggles? Yeah, you bet.
You bet.
Said, "I can do it," and seemingly had this sheath, if you will, around herself that prevented the naysayers from stopping Claire in her tracks. And she has left huge, huge footprints in the soil of social justice. And I applaud your work. I applaud your, being grandma to these biological and other kids, and being the voice of women and wisdom in our world. It happens that you're in Canada. And we are forever grateful and appreciative of that very voice. Claire, thank you.
Thank you, Deborah, for having me on. You've done a great deal, and your podcast is helping many, many women. So pat yourself on the back, and all the women who are listening out there, you can do it too. No matter what, it doesn't have to be huge, just anything that makes a difference every day.
Absolutely. So, Claire, tell us how our viewing audience can be in touch with you.
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way to reach me under Clare Beckton. And I always welcome people. I have quite a few people who are asking to join all the time. I welcome people joining or joining in on a conversation anytime. So, yes, LinkedIn is the best.
Absolutely. And we'll put that in the show notes. So, with that, I'm going to say thank you, Claire, and thank you for joining us on the We Can Do It Women Show. Remember, I see you, I value you, and your greatest chapter is just beginning. So, if today's episode
Absolutely.
sparked something in you, I invite you to check out every opportunity that's in front of you, because it's in front of you for a reason. And I invite you to step into the call of your next chapter. And until we meet again, pay attention to your money, and it will surely pay you back. Thank you so much.